My name is Max Bamford. Welcome to my talk. Today I'll be discussing why some children slouch and others don't, and what to do about it. I'll now show a picture of a child slouching in a school library. It was popular to believe that slouching was due to laziness, bad habit, poor self-esteem, and was more common in girls. This was in the 1970s when I started studying these subjects. The dictionary definition from dictionary.com is a sloucher is a lazy, inept or inefficient person. Now, I didn't happen to agree with that, so I studied it in more detail. What is the real reason that explains why some children slouch and others don't? What makes a person a hunchback? Physicians say that the condition is idiopathic. That is, we don't know what causes it. And that's a comment from the Body Book, 1986, page 173 in the Reader's Digest. And this is that book. And you can see the comments in that section there. Another book is The Specialties in General Practice, published in 1952, page 72-73, and it says about 85% of all cases of curvature of the spine falls into a classification known as idiopathic scoliosis. In this one group of cases, the etiology or cause remains obscure, and the disease has nearly a 95% predilection for girls. Now, this is that book from 1952, and page 72-73, you can see those comments there. The cause of kyphoscoliosis is known in 20% of cases, but unknown in the remaining 80%. And kyphosis is hunchback physique, and scoliosis is sideways curvature of the spine, and kyphoscoliosis is a combination of the two. And that quote is from Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, 6th edition, 1970, page 1299. And you can see that quote there. Now, the general impression in those days was in the books written for the medical profession and in books written for specialists, GPs, and for the general public, but in 80% of cases, the cause of these problems wasn't known. And in order to find what actually did cause those 80%, in order to solve that mystery, I looked at the known causes as a starting point. And there were 3 examples given in those books in general: infection, rickets, injury, and there was another small number of cases where it's genetic. Some people are born with particular facial features, particular height that they're likely to grow to, and some people are born with some minor postural abnormalities, and some people are born with genetic diseases that influence the shape of the spine. The infections include mainly, the one that was given was tuberculosis of the spine. So I'd like to go back to the 19th century because it can make some of these things clearer. There were many cows in the 19th century that had bovine tuberculosis, and they could be transmitted to humans through the milk, so a lot of infants developed the condition, and it could be transmitted through dust and through blood contact, etc. And when it infected children or adults, it mainly affected the lungs, but and sometimes it resulted in death. But sometimes the tuberculosis spread to the front of the spine, where it caused problems with the spinal vertebrae and the discs between them, and that a section of the spine would collapse, and the person would end up with a permanently healed and permanently bent spine. And that's tuberculosis of the spine. There's similar problems like that due to infections. Another problem in the 19th century was that the Industrial Revolution meant that every house had chimneys and was peat or coal-fired heating coming out of the chimneys with smoke. Factories produced the smoke, and trains produced smoke, and the cities of London, for example, where there are fogs, the sky was black, the buildings were black, the cobblestones were black, and the buildings become taller because of the increase in population, and the spaces between buildings was narrow, and so children were brought up in dark houses and played games in dark alleyways, and with the lack of sunshine they developed rickets, which is vitamin D deficiency due to the lack of sunshine, etc., and lack of vitamin D in the diet. And as a result, it weakens the bones and the spine collapses under the weight of the child. Another problem, more obvious in the 19th century, was when people would fall off their horses and injure their backs. Medical treatment in those days wasn't as good, so sometimes they'd end up healing in the bent position. Now, this particular diagram shows a 90-degree bend in the spine, and it's caused by tuberculosis of the spine, and similarly, it's rather an extreme spinal deformity, or put another way, an extreme form of slouching. This next picture shows a child, an infant who developed rickets and died. And you can see how it's affected the shape of the spine and the body generally. Some children live to adulthood despite their rickets, and this is the shape of the spine and the chest in a person who developed rickets and lived to be adult. Now, another diagram that I found from the 1930s was the idea that if you carry a heavy satchel full of school books to school every day for a few years, that you'll end up with sideways curvature of the spine. And that if you wear a knapsack and you distribute the weight evenly on each shoulder, that your spine will grow in a more upright fashion, rather than being curved to one side like from carrying school books like that. But that concept went in and out of fashion because most people didn't take it seriously, and they said that the spine would simply bounce back to its normal shape as soon as you put your satchel down. So nobody took it seriously. It simply didn't take off and was largely ignored. But I can remember when I was young, all the children carried heavy school books to school in kit bags and satchels. And it was much the same when I began selling my books on posture to schools in the 1990s, when I wanted every school child to know the importance of developing a naturally straight spine. So I would go to school like this, half hour every morning, carrying a kit bag, which is that wide, or a heavy satchel full of school books, half hour every morning, or more than that, high school, and half hour every night for about 12 years of my education. So that's, it actually does cause sideways curvy spine. That's one of the other 80% that it's called unknown. It is the cause. Now, I sold my books to 800 or 1,000 school and public libraries, and sometimes my website was #1 for posture on the Google search engine. And I now see children walking to school wearing knapsacks in local school and in other countries on TV as well. I sold my books in Australia, throughout Australia and overseas, to get teachers and parents and children to know that you shouldn't be carrying heavy books in kit bags on one side of your body like this. And one of my objectives was to make that change, and it actually happened. I used to go to school, see a trail of kids going to school, follow them to the school, and then sell my books to the library. And nowadays, when I go and see these trail of kids, they're all wearing knapsacks. It's because of me. I said to the librarians and the teachers that children should be advised to sit up straight, but was told that children won't listen to you anyway. And as a child, my doctor told my father to let the kid slouch. It won't do him any harm. Well, my doctor was a well-meaning family doctor, but slouching is not good, and I'll explain to you why that is later. Now, other people responded by saying, if you compress the body, it will bounce back, as in wrestling, when you bend the body in all sorts of ways, but then afterwards everything returns to normal. And they were saying the human body is very adaptable to change, so it doesn't matter. Well, that was popular in the 1970s and up until I came along and showed that it does matter. One of the statements made that is generally heard from time to time is, just as the twig is bent, the tree's inclined. Now, this comes from Alexander Pope, the hunchback poet. And I'm not sure if he's referring to life in general or his spine, but it does refer to the shape of the spine. And the trunk of a tree is the same as the trunk of the human body, the spine. If you are a farmer and you want to bend a tree and stake it down, and you do so for a year or two, it will grow up to that shape. And if you allow the tree to grow straight, it generally will. And when it's young, it's easily bent. But by the time a tree is tall and matured, like an oak tree, if you drive a Mack truck into it, you'll break the Mack truck. It becomes solid. And the same with humans. When it's young, the spine is pliable, and that's why it does bend if you keep carrying heavy kit bags to school. Won't happen if you just do it one day, but if you're doing it every day, twice a day for years, it'll change the shape of your spine. And then when you're an adult, if the spinal bones are curved and the ligaments have stretched, etc., you'll find that you can't straighten by just sitting up straight, because you're using muscles to straighten bones, and they'll become, they won't be able to do it. So you go back to the posture that is appropriate to your shape. Now, I sold my books to public and school libraries, teachers, principals and librarians, And some of the librarians said a book on posture is boring. It's another reason why these ideas never took off before me. And they wanted kids to read, the kids wanted to read adventure stories about Treasure Island or Robinson Crusoe, etc. So they said, why don't you make it interesting to children, e.g. by adding some biographies of famous people with poor posture. So I did, and I considered and actually wrote brief biographies about Howard Hughes, the billionaire, Charles Darwin, the genius, and the hunchback poet, Alexander Pope, and a number of others. Now, this is a picture of Alexander Pope, 1688 to 1744, the hunchback poet. I got information on his biography from a biography by Edith Sitwell, which was first published in 1930 and again in 1948. And I'll now read a quote from page 28. This is that book. As we're looking here at page 28, you may be able to read that. But what it states is this: he was attacked by a wild cow who knocked him down, trampled on him, and wounded him in the throat with her horns. That was when he was about 3 years old. And there's a lot of doubt about whether or not that had anything to do with his deformity. But from what I read, I would reasonably confident in saying that when that cow trampled him, it probably had bovine tuberculosis. It also gouged him in the neck and brought blood, and it's quite likely that's the way the tuberculosis was transmitted. And rather than going to the lungs, it went straight to the spine, which is, of course, because he was gouged in the neck, and the spine became infected, collapsed and healed, and he recovered from the infection and had the permanently bent spine, as I've shown you before. So his deformity is probably caused by tuberculosis of the spine when he was 3. In one of the poems, he wrote about his headaches, indigestion, 1,000 aches and pains, and described his life as a long disease. And shortly before he died, he said he was dying of 100 symptoms and wrote that writing is becoming painful to me and sitting hurting his breast, etc. He died of Bright's disease, etc., age 56. Now, regarding the argument that leaning forward and won't change the shape of the spine, and that carrying heavy books won't change the shape of the spine because the spine will just bounce back, I found in the 19th century that women wore corsets, and the corsets were designed by tailors, and they wanted to make the woman wanted to have a particular body shape, so the tailors would design them, and there were certain templates that they used to create shapes for the women's physique. And some women wanted a straight back with a tilt, some wanted a minor curve in the lower back or a major curve, some wanted it to cause their breasts to protrude forward or their buttocks to protrude backwards. And so these corsets were designed to create that shape, and in some cases they produced training corsets which were aimed at bringing about those changes permanently. Now this is the shape of the spine deformed by a corset, and you can see it's quite can see it's quite pronounced. And this is what happens if you wear a corset for many years. On the left you have a diagram of a broad and natural chest, and on the right you have a V-shaped chest, which is the ribs have been permanently changed in their shape by the corset. And to illustrate how that happens, I've got another picture of another painting from 1596 which shows the Countess of Leicester and her children. Now you can see children there, perhaps from the age of 4, 6, 8, 10, teenagers, and they are even younger. And the idea is to wear those corsets with that triangular shape. They're called stays, so that the person develops a permanent body shape according to that design as they become adults. And you'll notice the mother isn't wearing the stays. That's another matter that I can discuss at another time. So the cause of scoliosis, or the cause of kyphoscoliosis, the cause of these minor to major changes in the shape of the spine and the tendency to slouch was known in 20% of cases when I started doing my research in 1975. All the books said that it's only known in 20% or 15%. The other 80% they didn't know. Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, distributed every university and every major medical centre in the world at that time, as well as all the other books. Well, now you know the cause. It's these influences on the shape of the spine that are due to the types of pressures on the spine caused by carrying satchels or diseases of the spine, or the way you clothe your torso with either corsets or stays, or other influence on the spine such as tight belts and so forth. They are the types of factors that influence the spine. If you have a look in an individual, you'll find those causes are present. So the cause of the remaining 80% of cases is known and it is traceable. So what causes slouching then? Well, it's not laziness, it's not a bad habit, it's not lack of self-esteem, as was said in the 1970s. They are insignificant, they don't have any influence on this at all. Anyone who says they do is just exaggerating, and they haven't recognised the real cause before. Now, pictures speak 1,000 words. In this picture you can see 4 of the diagrams in the top refer to rickets and tuberculosis of the spine, the others of slouching, corsets, carrying heavy satchels, curvature of trees, the wearing of stays for a decade or more, the bent spine, all relate to the other 80% of causes. And of course, the old gum tree down at Glenelg in South Australia is permanently curved, and you can't straighten. It's not caused by bad habit or laziness. It's caused by the types of factors I've been discussing, and you can't straighten it by telling the person to sit up straight. You need to understand the cause, the real cause, and you need to educate children to be aware of causes of postural changes and to prevent them. So that's the 80% of cases, and given that picture speaks 1,000 words, you can think about the 80% of causes by considering that tree. Now, Now, I'd like to go further by discussing why I became interested in this, because I had those problems and I wasn't lazy. I didn't have any of those other causes. I knew there had to be a better cause than that was presented to me, and I therefore became curious about how I developed these problems, in much the same way as I was curious about how Alexander Pope developed his problems. I'd like to show you a photo of myself. I came into the family photo albums were handed down to me, and fortunately I had access to some information about my past. Now, this is a photo of me when I was 4 years old. And you can see that I've got a good complexion, good hair, a good spine shape, plenty of body mass, and looked like the ideal physically healthy child. My mother tells me she breastfed me up until the age of 2, 3 or 4 or something, for a long time anyway. But when I was 5, I developed or contracted measles. And the measles spread to my eyes, and they also caused meningitis. Now, when it affected my eyes, I had 2 operations to try and fix the problem, and I was prescribed glasses because the operations didn't succeed. One eye bit was weaker than the other due to the effect of the measles on my on the muscle of the muscular structure of my left eye. And also at the age of 6, my mother tells me I had hepatitis for many months, and that involves nausea and vomiting and would have involved weight loss. And that's the sort of thing that causes the muscle tone, the body weight and so forth to deteriorate, and then my spine collapsed upon my body, so that when I was 7, you can see that as evidence in this photo here. You can see my physique has changed in major ways. And that change in my physique, nothing was done to prevent it because nobody understood the problems in those days. But that change was permanent. As you can see here, this is me at the age of 12. Now, I felt reasonably healthy, but that was at the age of 12. That was my physique. You see, one shoulder is lower than the other from carrying heavy kit bags to school. When I was thin. My parents weren't well educated. My nutrition as a child also wasn't very good. And you can see I'm wearing glasses. And you can see one eye looks larger than the other, and that relates to the magnification in the lens plus the condition of the eye. And I was very thin. And when I was about 25, my health had gradually got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, until I was extremely ill at the age of 25. Medication wasn't helping. No form of treatment was helping. The doctors couldn't explain it, so that's why I started my own research. It was a matter of the only way I was ever going to get better is to find out what was going on and fix the problem. And by the time I was about 30, I'd come to the conclusion, a very complex set of assessments of what was going on, that any form of leaning forward towards desks or benches was the cause of those problems. And it was compressing my chest and abdomen to cause chest pains, breathing problems, abdominal pain, fatigue, etc. Kidney aches, backache, neck ache and jaw pain. And you can see in the diagram in this essay published in the Australasian Nurses Journal in June 1980, you can see the diagram and the essay that I wrote, the matter of framework, how a framework of the body produces a framework of symptoms. I've since called it the posture theory. And one day I was walking through the T3 Plaza shopping centre and I saw an artist drawing portraits and they looked good and they were reasonably priced. So I asked him if he could draw my diagram neatly, and he did, and this is the diagram he produced. And I had recovered, but was still quite ill at the age of 30, but I was a lot better off than I was when I was 25. And because I'd started implementing some of these measures to prevent and remedy the damage that had been done. And this is a photo of me about the age of 32. When I became involved in a research project which was reported all the way around the world as world first, and that was a chronic fatigue study. It was reported widely throughout Australia anyway, and I think that the reports went further. Now, I'd like to make a statement here that I heard recently. It's a famous saying, and it says, "Every truth passes through 3 stages before it is recognised. In the first it is ridiculed, in the second it is opposed, and in the third it is regarded as self-evident." Well, that comes from the Harper Book of Quotations, 3rd edition, page 451. Well, when I first wrote these ideas that posture was the cause of health problems, I did have some support, obviously, from the editor of the Australasian Nurses Journal, Edna Davis, because she published 15 of my essays between 1978 and 83, and I actually met Edna on several occasions to discuss what I was doing. There are several other people who agree with me, people who knew me, but generally people who didn't know me said I was talking nonsense. They were sometimes jealous, hostile, resentful. I couldn't get anywhere with the media because I couldn't get anyone in the academic world to agree with me, because I still teach at psychological theory, psychological course, and psychotherapy as treatment of their psychology students. And here is a letter from the ABC, which is typical. So my ideas are too radical to consider, too controversial, and without academic support. Here's a comment from after I wrote the posture theory, I still had a lot of health problems that I needed to solve, and about 17, 18 years later, when I had cancer and after I had heart disease, I invented the world's first standing computer desk. I did it by experimenting a lot with standing, sitting, moving, alternating between the two, and adding platforms to the top of my desk, learning to type, learning to use a computer. After several different types of computer, I worked out a way of positioning them so I could prevent a lot of these health problems. It was the world's first standing computer desk, and I invented it in 1998, and thought that I'd get sort of instant fame and wealth, but the newspapers didn't want to know, the furniture companies didn't want to know. They said nobody was interested, nobody was buying them. The universities were still teaching psychology, and the Skeptic magazine, the vice president was a psychologist, and he basically said that I was wrong and the psychological theories were right. He said that around about 1998, he reviewed the 8th edition of my book, where the front picture was a man standing at a desk. As before, I invented the standing computer desk and published that in 1999, invented it in 1998. And this is a review from the Skeptics magazine where he says, oh, I'm wrong and the psychological theories are still correct. Now, this is a picture from my book, which shows the progress between not knowing the cause to knowing that sitting was the cause, few experiments with standing, comparing the fact that leaning forward compresses the chest and abdomen to cause a range of symptoms, and tight corsets compress the chest and abdomen from the side and cause the symptoms. Posture compresses the chest and abdomen from above. And there's the standing computer desk, 1998, separate position, standing. Standing, taller desk, and position the keyboard screen. That's what everybody now copies. Are making millions of dollars and claiming that they did the research when they didn't, and that they invented the desk and they didn't. They just copied. A few nuts and bolts are different to make them look different, a few words have changed, but it's all my theory. Now, this is what happened in 2007 when I went into Wikipedia. It's obviously that there are some anonymous editors in Wikipedia, possibly psychologists, and they don't like the fact that I proved 100 years of psychiatric theory was wrong, that the aches and pains which they said were caused by neuroses, conversion disorders or whatever, they said they were psychological problems. I proved they were physical. So they don't want the public to know that I proved them wrong, so they want to hide the fact that I exist. So when my theory went in there at this particular stage, when I said the symptoms were previously considered to be psychological in basis, 6 editors come rushing in within 6 hours, accused me of breaking the rules. Now, had I broken a rule, they'd all have said I'd broken a particular rule. They just wanted to get rid of me. So what they said, delete, delete, speed delete, speed delete, delete, delete. One said it was conflict of interest, another said it's copyright breach, another said it's just one man's theory, etc. They're just looking for excuses to get rid of me, and they made it look as if they had a legitimate reason to delete the article by saying I'd broken a rule. Now, a few months later, they knew the value of my theory, so they stole it and wrote a new page called Poor Posture. So they, first of all, they deleted my theory, the posture theory, and 3 months later they wrote something to replace it called Poor Posture. It never existed in Wikipedia before, and they said basically poor posture comes from the stretching of ligaments on one side of one part of the spine, the loosening on maybe the front or something. Now, there's a minor role to be played there, but they're just messing about. The real reason is what I have to explain to you, and they're just trying to sabotage my website and my books and me. And another thing they did some time later, after they banned me from Wikipedia using their ignore all rules policy, they just want to get rid of me and hide me from the public. They corresponded with somebody in Europe, in an overseas country, in a foreign language, to write another article about posture in a foreign language version of Wikipedia. And what they did was they wanted to put a spin on it so that it looked like the psychological theories were the ones that were correct and the only ones that existed about the psychological cause of slouching. And so they got my 2 elements. As I said, the 2 elements of my theory are that poor posture compresses the chest and abdomen and cause health problems, and tight corsets compress the chest and abdomen, cause the same range of symptoms. Pressure from above from poor posture, from the sides from corsets. So they want to use those 2 elements to sabotage my theory. So what they said was, and they used diagrams, they had a photo of or a painting of a man who was sad and slouched to imply sadness causes slouching. And they had a photo of a woman wearing a corset or a drawing of a woman wearing a corset sitting upright with an appearance of pride and confidence to imply that pride and confidence is what causes people to sit upright. In other words, psychological factors cause you to sit upright. Negative psychological factors cause you to slouch. It's a clear attempt at sabotaging my theory and making theirs look correct. They called it posture psychology. After completing the page in a foreign country, they then told the editors in the English version of Wikipedia, it's finished, so the editors in the English version translated it into English and put it into the English version of Wikipedia instantly. Make it look like it had been there for 10 years. It hadn't. It's brand new. And they're saying, they called the page posture psychology. Psychology. And then what they did is this. There's a list of articles on posture in Wikipedia, and you normally list them alphabetically, but they put posture psychology as the top of the list. So it's the first thing that anyone who goes to Wikipedia will read. And it's not because it's the best article, it's because millions of people read Wikipedia. Whereas if you or I set up a page and it's the best in the world and gets a lot of hits, Wikipedia will do an article and they'll get more hits because millions of people read Wikipedia, and so their articles come up first. A lot of people complained about that because of the distortion of values. And what Wikipedia did is they got their page on posture psychology #1 on the Google search engine pretty quick. It put me out of the top 10, put me out of #1, where I was occasionally. I was always, or generally on the top 10 list. I disappeared. Now you won't find out anything about me. From within Wikipedia, they sabotaged my theory, and now they're sabotaging my theory and me outside of Wikipedia. Which is why you don't know that I exist and that I've written all these theories. Well, they're not the only ones trying to sabotage me. Now, here is their page, Posture Psychology, and you can see the man slouching who looks sad and the woman wearing corset who looks a little bit arrogant. And here's another diagram from Wikipedia's page, Posture Psychology. A woman looking sad and slouching, and a woman looking rather neutral and standing upright, and they look like 19th century women, which is another. Now here is just a summary again. My website on posture was on the top Google search page for decades, and Wikipedia was nowhere to be found. After they defamed my character and wrote their spin-offs to sabotage my website rankings, their page went from nowhere to #1 and mine disappeared from search engine view. They did that deliberately. Of course, they'll deny it. So, they added posture psychology to the English version of Wikipedia in one hit in 2011. That's about 4 years after they deleted my theory on the physical base of postural problems, which I've just discussed in this talk. Now, the top editors of Wikipedia have a code name for their readers, and that is PCCCTL, which means Personal Computer Cattle, which means that they consider the readers of Wikipedia to be as easily led as sheep and cattle. In other words, easily brainwashed. Their objective appears to be to control the public mind through what they write in this instance, delete the truth and replace it with what they want the public to believe. Now, if you want to do anything about that, you can try and put my theory back in Wikipedia and see what happens. Try and delete theirs and see what happens. Not all editors in Wikipedia are dishonest, but there's quite a few of them are. And they have motives for wanting the public to think one thing or another. But I'll conclude now. I've explained to you in this video that in the 1970s, the cause of slouching, the cause of minor spinal deformities, even significant ones, was not known in 80% of cases when I started doing research. Now it's taken for granted all around the world that the way you sit, stand and move, the clothing you wear, the types of illnesses you've had when you're young, the types of nutrition you've had throughout your life, the sort of mechanical pressures that are exerted on the body all influence your posture, and that if you understand that process the way I developed an understanding of it, and if you do something about it based on that understanding, then you can prevent these problems and you can improve your health. And so from not knowing the cause of these problems to writing the posture theory, to inventing the standing desk, to now the world has changed, and it's been due to the research that I've done on these matters. So now you know why children slouch. Don't accuse them of having bad habits, or don't accuse them of being lazy. Don't accuse them of being foolish. Just provide them with the information, and most kids are intelligent. They'll take that into consideration, and they'll grow up straighter and healthier. Thank you.